Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to everyone who's joining us online. My name is Pierce Paul Kriesman. I'm the Executive Director of and it's my pleasure to have you all here with us tonight, or tomorrow, or the next day if you're watching this later recorded online. We have a wonderful opportunity ahead of us tonight to learn more about a really exciting site. And I'm glad that we have one of the world's foremost experts on such a place here with us to tell us all of the wonderful mysteries that still remain. But before we do, again, thank you all for joining us. I hope you'll join us for our next lecture on February 25th. Professor Daryl Roll will talk to us about the al-Jimal archaeological site and its recent inscription into the World Heritage List. So we're very excited to have that opportunity. But before we get there, on we go. Tonight we have with us Benjamin Porter, who's an associate professor of Middle Eastern archaeology in the University of California at Berkeley's Department of Middle Eastern Languages and Cultures. Now, Professor Porter has forthcoming just next month. This month, actually, because it is now February, a new book, Against Moab, Interrogating the Archaeology of Iron Age Jordan through the Cambridge University Press. And I'm told it will be accessible online. Open access. So if you want to learn more about this time period, the Iron Age, particularly, which is one of Professor Porter's areas of expertise, please don't hesitate to see that. And as soon as it's available, we will make sure to share with everybody on our social media so that you all have the opportunity to do so. Tonight, we'll be hearing about the Iron Age townscape of Busayra. So without further ado, I introduce Professor Porter.
Helped me and individuals and universities that have helped me produce the research you'll see tonight. And thanks to all of you joining us at home. So today I'll be talking about my research on Busayra. It's an ancient town that is considered to be ancient Bozrah, the capital of the Iron Age Kingdom of Edom, sometimes pronounced Edom. I'll be pronouncing it both ways tonight. Now, Busayra, like many of you know, is located 20 kilometers south of modern Tafila and 60 kilometers north of Wadi Musa. It takes about 1 hour exactly to drive from downtown Wadi Musa to the site. And of course, it's along the King's Highway. So Busayra was first documented by European travelers in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Yet the site did not see excavation until the work of the British archaeologist Crystal Bennett during the 1970s. Her team identified multiple Iron Age buildings that I'll be talking about tonight. We'll really be building off the work that Crystal Bennett performed. So in 2013, I began the Busayra Cultural Heritage Project. The goal was to simultaneously address outstanding research questions about Busayra, questions that were left over from the work in the 1970s, as well as conduct a site assessment and develop a site management plan. So think about the future of Busayra as a heritage spot. So today I want to briefly place Busayra in its historical context for you, and then summarize how my research is changing how we think about Busayra's broader settlement design, what one might call like a townscape. I'm also going to showcase our site management work, and along the way I'll describe new opportunities that are available for cultural heritage management and archaeological research at Busayra. So Busayra draws its importance from the fact that it was Edom's largest settlement and the kingdom's likely capital. Now, this kingdom, of course, spread through the southwest corner of Jordan. We don't precisely know its territorial boundaries. Edom had its origins in the late 2nd millennium BCE. Semi-nomadic communities living on either side of the Hor Valley, or sometimes known as the Wadi Arba, organized agro-pastoralist economies and copper mining industries. Now, the Kingdom of Edom likely grew from this milieu of pastoralist and mining communities who eventually founded Busayra. But just how this process happened, however, it's a matter of extreme scholarly debate, and so I'm not going to be concerning myself with that issue tonight. Now, the Edomite kingdom grows visible in the archaeological evidence during the 8th century BC. Now, Busayra is founded at this time, to the extent that we know about it, as well as many villages on remote mountain tops throughout southern Jordan. This one in particular sits right in the middle of Petra, called Biara, and it was also excavated by Crystal Bennett. So the Kingdom of Edom likely drew its wealth from its strategic location on the Aromatics route that connected Arabia and the Mediterranean Sea. Caravans loaded with incense and perfume and spices passed through Edom on their way to cities like Gaza and Damascus. Now, Edom's political autonomy was slightly curtailed when the Assyrian Empire expanded its reach into the Levant from its base in northern Mesopotamia, what is today northern Iraq, during the 8th and 7th centuries BCE. Edom escaped destruction by becoming one of the empire's many vassals. So cuneiform sources tell us that Edom's kings delivered tribute to the Assyrian imperial court as one way to fulfill their vassal obligations to the empire. So we have these records that suggest the kings of Edom were traveling all the way to northern Iraq to deliver the tribute that was required of them. So Edom seems to have weathered the ups and downs of the Assyrian Empire, but was significantly weakened in the 6th century BCE when the site and the broader kingdom was likely attacked during a Babylonian imperial campaign through the region, which we put around 550 BCE. Now, excavations at Busayra have added a considerable amount of information to this historical picture of Edom, and it's also raised a lot of questions. The town of Busayra is located, the ancient town also was located on a narrow 1.5 long kilometer spur that extends out from the plateau, the Transjordanian plateau. And that spur sits between 2 wadi canyons. So here in this circle is the perimeter of this spur, this finger that extends out into the plateau. And then on either side, we have a wadi system here, a very steep one here, and a more shallow one here. Now, building on these spurs was a common strategy in the Iron Age. You can find many settlements on the Karak Plateau and south of the Karak Plateau in which Iron Age settlements were founding themselves on these spurs. And there was 2 advantages. The first advantage was that it provided immediate protection. You had immediate defensive strategies because those wadis were there that could protect the perimeter of your town. The second was that you were located close to the wadi where you could bring your herds down to water them, or you could go hunting or gather plants or building materials for your houses. So these spurs were ideal locations for human settlement. Now, the ancient settlement that's Busayra, it's difficult to determine its precise perimeter because Iron Age architecture is obscured by the modern settlement of Busayra. Now, we have found a corner of a fortification system, this fortification system, sitting right here on this edge of the plateau of the spur that suggests that the town extended from this edge here, where there's a very well-known fortification wall, to this edge here. So that in that perimeter would have been the extent, we believe, of Busayra. We've also, or I should say, Burton MacDonald, the late Burton MacDonald, when he surveyed Busayra in the 1980s, found broken ceramic fragments throughout the modern town that suggest that settlement was distributed across the entire village. So if this is correct, what I'm saying here is correct, Busayra was therefore one of the largest settlements during the first millennium in southern Jordan. It had been much larger than all of those small villages that we find on remote mountaintops. So fortunately, the northern spur of the northern third of the spur is empty today of modern architecture, and today it's used for agriculture and herding. And this is this area here. This northern spur is very edge. You can see there's a few buildings on the edge. Now, there are three wide terraces that step down off the north side of the spur that go directly into the wadi. And each terrace, when you look closely, is bounded by very impressive fortification walls that are sometimes much taller than me, in fact, more than 2 meters, 3 or 4 meters high, that you find when you walk along the edges of this site. And it's still very visible on the surface. So the 2.6 hectare terrace at the very top, in this red, inside of these red lines here, is where Crystal Bennett focused her excavations in the 1970s. And today this area is owned and managed by Jordan's Department of Antiquities. Now, a sizable fortification system surrounds most of this area. And you can get a sense of just how impressive these fortifications are by looking at this gate. You would have walked into this gate and turned. You can see how tall those walls, how well preserved those walls are today. So Bennett's excavations identified 2 monumental buildings, only one of which I'm going to discuss tonight. And this is what we'll call Building A. It's a 2,300 square meter administrative building. You see it here on the left. And this building consists of 2 halves, a west wing and an east wing, each of which is characterized by a large rectangular courtyard in the middle of the wing. And then around the courtyard, we have small chambers. The western half, the west wing, if you will, likely served as an administrative function, while the purpose of the eastern half is uncertain. There's debates around the purpose of the eastern wing. So here's an aerial view on the left, and here's a drawing taken from Crystal Bennett's excavations on the right. So a rectangular chamber on the courtyard's western edge may hold the answer to the building's purpose. A cistern sits in the middle of this courtyard, and to the east of the cistern, there's a threshold of distinct red stones that give way to a raised platform. You can see, it's kind of drowned out here, but you can see these distinct red stones that give way to this platform here. And this platform was likely a dais on which a throne chair, or a cult statue may have been situated. Now, whatever happened in this room was likely very important and then no doubt very interesting. Scholars are divided about the room's purpose. Some have suggested that this was a throne room, possibly for a king or a similar royal official. Others have suggested the room was part of a shrine that was dedicated to Edom's patron deity, Kos. Now, more excavation, of course, is needed to determine which interpretation is correct, or perhaps we haven't considered what a third interpretation. So Building A was constructed at some point in the mid-8th century and used throughout the 7th century, that is during the height of the Assyrian Empire's domination of the Levant. So this building would have been here during this time period when Edom was a vassal of the Assyrian Empire. But this building was likely destroyed in the mid-6th century during that Babylonian campaign that came through Jordan around 550 BCE. But thankfully, the building was repaired soon after and was used during the 5th and the 4th centuries BCE. Then altogether, this building that we're looking at was used for about 400 years. That's based on our current knowledge of when the building was constructed and when it was destroyed or abandoned. So that's enough about this building I'm going to be talking about, because you have to understand this building and understand the other things I'm going to show you. So there remains a lot of research to accomplish at Busayra, and Building A, I should note, has not been completely excavated. Furthermore, there are entire areas of the site that have yet to be documented. You can see we have these blank areas here where we have no idea what's going on. So at the same time, there are old excavation trenches that are eroding. There are spoil heaps that dot the landscape of the site. And there's ancient architecture that's calling out for a good cleaning to make buildings more interpretable to visitors. So there's a lot to do. Busayra is therefore an ideal place where archaeological research and cultural heritage conservation practices can be integrated into a single research design. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking about 3 types of activities that have met these goals. First, non-invasive site documentation. Second, archaeological excavation. And third, what I'll call sensible site management activities. So the first thing we did, what most archaeologists do when they start a new site, is they make a topographic map and they use geographic information system software to create a platform to generate images like this. This helps us keep track of all of the digital data that we collect when we excavate. So we were able to take new data as well as Crystal Bennett's information and integrate it into a platform. Real quick, I should point out that we brought Crystal Bennett's fields in and used her field labeling. Here's field A, field B, C, and D. We'll be talking about A and B today. So this area here. Oh, yeah. So you notice that we have a good portion of the Acropolis that remains unexcavated. So our team therefore decided to conduct a geophysical survey on unexcavated areas to identify subsurface, what we'll call anomalies, such as stone walls and cisterns that might be located under the ground. So these techniques are ideal, and I think we're starting to use them more and more in Jordan. I know we recently, Pierce Paul used them at Petra, and it allows us to detect features, archaeological features underground without having to disturb the archaeological deposits or the soil deposits. So it can be a very robust way of managing cultural heritage resources. So we received a grant from the National Science Foundation funded Spatial Archaeometry Research Collaborations at the University of Arkansas's Center for Advanced Spatial Technologies, known as CAST. CAST provided the equipment and the personnel, and we brought our own staff, and we were able to conduct 2 survey seasons in 2014 and 2015 to collect these data. So the team used 2 geophysical instruments. First, a magnetic gradiometer, and second, a ground-penetrating radar with a mid-frequency antenna of 400 megahertz. Now, although both instruments identified subsurface anomalies, they didn't always give us the same anomalies, and sometimes the quality was a little different. So the way these machines work, if you can see in this nice diagram I grabbed from the internet here, is that when you move one of these instruments across the ground, it shoots a pulse into the ground, it transmits a pulse into the ground, and if that pulse detects something, it bounces back up. And as it bounces back up, the data recorder that's on your machine will collect that point. So if you do that enough across the landscape, you're going to be able to identify where a wall is, where a cistern is, or actually where there might be nothing too. So it helps you identify the gaps between anomalies. This is a very common technology that's being used now throughout Jordan, throughout the Middle East, throughout the world, in fact. And it's becoming far more affordable all the time. So we divided the site into 3 zones. The 3 zones that were guided by topographic differences: Zone 1, Zone 2, and Zone 3. So note that Zone 2, the middle zone, is raised several meters higher than Zones 1 and 2 on either side. And you'll see why in a moment. We'll start with Zone 1. Zone 1 is located, Zone 1 is located on the settlement's west side, and Bennett found a small gate and multiple these rectangular Iron Age houses in an area she labeled Area B, or Field B. And we can see this here in between those 2 red boxes. Now, these rectangular buildings that she found are very typical house designs for the 8th and 7th centuries BCE. So we know that we have like a domestic residency, like everyday people were living in the houses here in between. So we decided to survey on either side of Field B, where we identified additional buildings. And we also found open spaces that lacked architecture altogether. Now I'm going to be showing you some of these black and white and color maps here. I don't expect you to become experts in reading geophysical data in the next 15 or 20 minutes, but you can look for these red lines where I point out where those anomalies can be found. So an anomaly, for example, would be this white line here, which is rock tumble. And when you see these dark spots is where we actually have nothing, where there are no anomalies. Okay, so we know that on the north side, we had 2 houses. And then on the south side, we found additional houses here. And here, little not very clear here, as well as we have these open spaces. So this new information confirms that a neighborhood of domestic residencies were basically living just inside this gate here. And we have what we might describe as a neighborhood of people living their everyday lives. Now, zone 3, over here on the other side, was significantly different. Very few anomalies appeared in the collected data. In fact, we found no architecture in this area here at all. And so zone 3 was therefore likely a plaza that served as a pathway to the larger complex we're about to see in this area here. So we can imagine that people may have entered the site this way and processed through this plaza. And as you'll see in a moment, there's a gate right here that would bring you in to the complex. So let's get on to zone 2, which is no doubt the most exciting. Here we learn that Bennett's Building A is is part of a much larger complex of connected buildings that are bounded by fortification walls. So let me walk you through the complex here. So again, we see a black and white image. And in that black and white image, you'll see streaks of white lines. Those white lines are stone walls. Okay, stone walls. This will help you a little bit to make sense of this. Now, if you were visiting this area, you would have entered from the Zone 3 plaza here, through what's likely a 1 or 2 chamber gate located on the northeast corner. Next, you would have entered a smaller plaza. You see this white area, a plaza. And it's a much smaller plaza, of course. And this plaza is surrounded by smaller rooms. And those rooms were likely used to store goods and objects that were brought to the plaza. So this complex that we're looking at could hold a lot of organic and inorganic materials. So plazas were relatively common in Iron Age monumental buildings. It's not surprising at all to find that we have such plazas. Some were actually lined and decorated with carved orthostats. Now here's an example from a site that's on the Syrian-Turkish border called Carchemish and located on the Euphrates River, where there were several plazas that were decorated with these stone orthostats that had decorative programs. Here we see a man in a chariot pulling his arrow back, and he's running over a victim. These kinds of stone orthostat programs were often found in plazas. So I have no evidence to suggest there's something like this at Busayra, but on the other hand, I wouldn't be surprised if we found some kind of ceremonial space in those plazas, in the plaza at Busayra. So after visiting the plaza, so if you're standing here in this area here, you would then process south towards Building A through what was likely another gate. You would walk past this building here, which we do not know what its purpose was, and then you would take a right and then a left, and you would enter into Building A, into that courtyard that we don't know what it's used for, right? We talked about that a few minutes ago. So what we know now is that the entire building complex was designed to provide protection and limited access to whatever activities were taking place in this room in Building A. And that raises several questions for us to answer. So my team, and so one way we can start to answer those questions is through excavation. So let's leave the geophysical data for a minute and look at the excavations that we've conducted so far in Building A. So here, in this corner here, and this is that cistern that I was just talking about, but we decided to excavate here for reasons I can talk about afterwards. A single room on the south side of Building A, And we identified two features in this room. We identified a base for an oven, as well as this installation here. So you would enter the room here and step down, and then there was some kind of activity surface here that we never quite understood. Our best guess is that this was a kitchen. And this is a reconstruction by a former UC Berkeley student that's giving you a sense of what the room looked like. So you would, if this was a bread kitchen, you would have your tabun or your bread oven here. You would enter the room, let's say with wheat that was ready to be processed, and you could put it onto this thick plaster surface that descended downward, and that could be prepared into a kind of pita that could then be baked on the oven. So you could produce a lot of bread under this scenario. The other thing you could do is after the bread has been cooked, you could be placing it on this thick plaster surface for the bread to cool. So this interpretation makes sense to me because whatever royal or ritual role Building A served, this kitchens like this one were absolutely necessary for feeding people or hosting public events like feasts. So excavations in other areas of Building A could identify different activities that took place in the building. For instance, the northeast corner adjacent to the courtyard is one potential candidate. And you can see that we have lots of potential candidates of at-risk cultural deposits here, here, in these red squares. Now, the reason these at-risk deposits exist is that in the 1970s, when Crystal Bennett excavated, her team excavated this building, they were looking to define walls to define the perimeter of different rooms inside the building. But as they did that, they left small islands, if you will, of cultural deposits that are now eroding out. And we're not going to have them, thanks to erosion and rainfall, we're not going to have them in 10 or 15 years. And so there's a bit of urgency about excavating deposits like this one here. So that brings me to my final point about cultural heritage management that I'd like to end with tonight. So Busayra is obviously an important cultural heritage monument for Jordan. The site draws its historical and cultural value from the fact that it's one of the few places in the kingdom where Iron Age monumental architecture is visible and where people can easily see it and interpret it, whether those are tourists from outside of the kingdom or inside the kingdom. So Busayra is also a relatively accessible site for visitors. It's located on the King's Highway, that important path that tourists will follow on the road to Petra. And the Wadi Dana biosphere is just located 5 minutes away, where you have opportunities for scenic views and hiking and camping. So when we started our work, we had this in mind when we conducted a cultural heritage site assessment for Busayra to evaluate the condition of the site, as well as identify any threats from humans, any threats from animals, or non-human elements like erosion. And overall, we found Busayra to be in a really good condition. It wasn't the greatest condition, certainly found some issues, but we were pleasantly surprised by the site's potential. There were no apparent signs of, say, looting, no intentional site destruction. There was not a substantial amount of erosion or animal burrowing. And these are the common threats that we see in archaeological sites in Jordan, right? So, in fact, like what we found was that the principal threats to Busayra concerned issues that were the result of previous excavation activities for the condition that the site was left in after the last excavation team. So the area that was most at risk was Area B, a 30 by 20 meter excavation trench where Bennett's team had documented a portion of the residential neighborhood I had talked about a few minutes ago. So the sides of the trench were eroding and the ancient stone architecture was collapsing. This is what it looked like here on the right when we got there. So after checking what was left of the architecture against the published plans, we built stone walls around the ancient architecture and then covered the trench with burlap. And then we spent a few days backfilling the trenches with dirt from nearby spoil heaps. And this took about a week to complete. So I'm glad to report that the trench that was most at risk at Busayra, we were able to deal with in a fairly efficient way. This is what it looked like when we were finished. This is what it looks like today. So speaking of spoil heaps, Busayra was littered with its fair share of spoil heaps that are left over from archaeological excavations. So when you excavate a trench and you remove the dirt, you need a place to put it, and it creates these artificial mounds around your archaeological site that create sometimes new problems for the site, so they need to be managed. But not all spoil heaps are created equal. Not all of them are evil. So we put one heap to good use as a visitor viewing platform on the west side of Building A. We cut back the spoil heap, you can see here, to re-expose the ancient wall, and then we built a retaining wall to separate the two features. So a person can climb up onto the top of the spoil heap and look out onto the building. But nevertheless, most spoil heaps need to be removed because they are either obscuring cultural features that visitors want to see, or they're contributing to erosion issues. So it's at this point that the Busayra Cultural Heritage Project partnered with USAID-funded Sustainable Cultural Heritage through engagement of local communities. USAID SHEP, as it was known, that was implemented by ACOR between 2014 and 2024. Now, with SHEP's support, we cleared some of the spoil heaps away from the north side of Building A that was obscuring the building's exterior wall. But it's the USAID SHEP program that deserves the credit for what happened next. SHEP staff built interpretive trails and installed signs at key places along the route. They also installed a metal viewing platform on the north side of Building A, so a visitor could ascend a few stairs and look down upon the building. They did a lot of work in the Busayra community to train guides and site stewards that would greet visitors and spread awareness about the ancient site's importance. And here is just a few examples of the work that SHEP did at Busayra. Now, despite all these wonderful efforts, there remains work to be done at Busayra. For example, like the interpretive trails, like all interpretive trails in Jordan, need occasional cleaning and maintenance. But in Building A, like I've said already, the architecture needs to be cleaned and stabilized in some areas. There's a handful of collapsing trenches that require backfilling, a few more spoil heaps that need to be removed, and there are eroding archaeological deposits in some corners of the buildings that require proper excavation and cleaning to enhance the building's interpretation. So today, I hope I've given you a better sense of how site conservation strategies, archaeological excavation, and non-invasive site documentation techniques can work together to both investigate and conserve and preserve the past. Integrating these cultural heritage practices have never been more important as we face the intractable challenges of the global climate crisis. I've argued in a newly published article that rising temperatures and increased aridity in the Middle East will make caring for cultural heritage sites like Busayra challenging, if not impossible, over the next several decades. We are literally racing against the clock to ensure that cultural heritage monuments remain intact for future generations to learn from them. Tonight, however, what we have learned about Busayra and the Kingdom of Edom is that the settlement was much larger and more complex than previously thought. The Building A complex likely took an enormous amount of human labor to construct in the 8th century and maintain through the 7th century. From a distance, the complex would have been visibly striking, a testament to the kingdom's leaders and their capacity to organize their constituents' labor and wealth. Whatever materials that were brought there, food, animals, Arabian aromatics, finished craft goods, would have found ample room for storage within its walls. So thank you for listening tonight, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so very much for this wonderful glimpse into what is still, I assume, several lifetimes worth of work.
Yes.
We will take a few questions and then we will adjourn for some refreshments, and we can continue interrogating our speaker there. So, okay.
Thank you very much for a very interesting and informative lecture. My question to you actually is two parts. Do you expect finding any mosaic work in the site? This is one thing. And then was there an earthquake that we expect to have happened in that area? Thank you.
Question, I don't think we'll find mosaics. The mosaic, this is much earlier than the mosaic tradition that begins in Jordan.
But like later, maybe some people later inhabited the area
Yeah.
and did the work.
Right. It's quite possible that there was a what we call a late antique or a Byzantine settlement at Busayra. We haven't found any indication of it in the area that's owned by the Department of Antiquities, but there is mention of those kinds of material. We did find those materials when the entire city was surveyed. So it's quite possible that the mosaic tradition that we see in Madaba, we see in Petra, may have been there as well. The second question is earthquakes. I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know if we have any documented earthquakes.
Destruction, I mean.
Yeah, right. And we can sometimes detect, you're right to ask, because we can sometimes detect when we're excavating stone architecture when there's been an earthquake. So, but I've not seen anything quite yet. Yeah.
Your device is very much like an X-ray machine,
Yes.
You can, if you can read an X-ray, you can read this.
Yes, yeah. I wish it was as good as an X-ray though. It's not, it's yeah. The technology is improving substantially.
Then we have an online question.
Ah.
Can you talk a little bit more about community engagement in the area and what your thoughts might be for continuing that in the future, if that's part of your
Yes.
intention?
Yes, I didn't have time. I know Shep did such a wonderful job of really standing up a community archaeology project in Busayra. That's something we certainly want to build upon. I think at this stage, in our thinking about what community archaeology is and what it should be, is that we should allow it to be organic, in that we want to understand where the community is beginning its understanding of the ancient site and of antiquity in general. When I've worked at Busayra in the past, I think this was before Shep had started working there, we had a lot of children that would come to us and describe the building that we were studying as a prison. And the sort of local understanding was that this building was a prison during the Ottoman period. And so there was not an awareness that this was actually, and that's a very understandable interpretation of like a large building in southern Jordan, especially given the history of southern Jordan during the Ottoman period, when there was oftentimes conflict. So that's a wonderful interpretation. So I think there's many opportunities to engage with the Busayra community, and if and when this project goes forward into this year and the next, will be, as I always do in my work, engaging with the local community. Yeah.
Thank you, Ben, for this lecture. Really, I've enjoyed it a lot. Just an open question about the reality and definition of kingdoms in the Iron Age. Always, as scholars, we don't have real definitions and outlining the nature of kingdoms and realities within the Iron Age. Always, there's many difficulties. I think the only chance we have, if you can dig again at Busayra, where you can refine and rediscover the reality, because I can see from the old pictures and what you have already presented to us, there is something. And I think Busayra is the only place in Jordan now where we can redefine the definition of reality, because always they are saying kingdoms, chief kingdoms, and this very long discourse and then disputes.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I think we do have a great opportunity. I'm not sure if the question was heard by our viewers at home. They do, okay.
Yeah. And I object, Jihad.
Good to fight.
We have Joel sitting right here. I think that there might be more to learn about the Ammonites.
I go down to Donna Nature Reserve whenever I feel like I've got to get out of town, go down and camp for a night, climb Jebel Rumani up, and then go back home to Amman. But I sit and talk with the guys who work there because I worked with him for 7 years with الجمعية الملكية لحماية الطبيعة, the RFCN. But never has anybody told me these fellows who come there and are interesting and interested. And I'm very impressed with the guys who run the Donna campsite. They're number one, they have very good behavior. They don't interfere in your life. I mean, they know just how much to, intervene. And they would be, why did they tell me about this? And why, when I walked down last time to Wadi Finan from Donna Village, there was on, this is maybe just before the COVID or during the COVID, there was a menu there to have an archaeologist. You had to make an appointment to show up and take you to the Roman mines or the ancient mines, the iron or the Roman or the Byzantine, whatever. Yeah, but nobody ever told me there's somebody there in Busayra that I could zip over there and on hand, or could be, they always make appointments ahead with the guides. And also, I'm so impressed with that, like a wall of, of showing how things were. I had no idea that was there. I didn't see any sign that said it. I went out to Beni Hamida, where I worked also for 10 years, but there they took me. I saw a similar treatment like that with beautiful pictures, that give you an idea. But I didn't see any sign. How come I'm so uninformed? Because they have a brochure with all the different hikes you can take. I didn't see one trip to Busayra at all.
I know during one of the goals of SHEP was to spread awareness about the different sites where they were working, including Busayra, and that meant going to sites that are better known on the visitor route and letting people know that there's a bigger world to explore. But I'll say that in the world of tourism and tourism studies, like those relationships have to be consistently maintained over time because staff changes, knowledge falls away. So there's always an opportunity to refresh. Thank you.
And there's just so many wonderful places in Jordan
Yes.
with such a broad and long history. It's hard to know, other than maybe Robert, of anybody who knows of every site in Jordan. There are very few people that just have all of it.
Yeah.
It's a blessing to have such wonderful range of problems to have to always discover new things.
And it's a blessing to have Robert Schick.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Porter. Considering the inputs of the suggested kitchen in Building A, in addition to the terraces per se, in addition to the historical fact documented the Edomites paying tribute to the Assyrian kings as crops, even before the invention of money, numismatics. My question is there any studies and or your good opinion, sir, that suggest Busayra was known for a certain product of crops when combining all such inputs? Thank you, sir.
There's a lot more work that needs to be done to understand the botanical history of southern Jordan. And we know we can do that because we often find carbonized seed remains when we excavate. So right now we can take an educated guess that wheat and especially barley would have been important. Barley because it's more drought resistant, and southern Jordan, as you know, receives a lot less rainfall than here in Amman. And so crops like barley would have been important. Yes. Now, and I really appreciate how well you studied the site and you were thinking about like where could you grow those crops. And that's a great question for thinking about what those plateaus were for that come down off the site. Like, could those be fields for wheat and barley? They could also have been sheep pens. We also know that the sides of the wadis could have been terraced for producing wheat. But the information that we now have, thanks to the geophysical data, we know that this was a major collecting place where people were bringing organic and inorganic materials. I would say another important industry in southern Jordan would have been textiles. So you have sheep and goat that you take their hairs and you could make. And we know that the Assyrians appreciated textiles that were made in Jordan. Yeah, even like the Wadi Mujib near Madaba, further south, they often talk about textiles traveling to northern Iraq. So
Well, I
I could
think
go on, but
we
you'll
know
have to
you,
read my
we know
book.
you can, but you have to do it in person over in our reception. So if we can do one more
Well, that's a
round of
good question.
applause and then we'll adjourn. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming in. Thank you for listening.
And please join us for some snacks and some beverages. And I saved it for last because I knew it was gonna come. I knew it was gonna be something like that, like where you connect.